So the Fellowship of Reconciliation was founded in 1914 and came to the United States in 1915. It's America's oldest interfaith peace organization. We have 18,000 members in 45 chapters and 65 affiliates throughout the United States, and the fellowship exists in 55 countries around the world. I've been following Mike's work on the web, I think, since shortly after it first began to appear, with gratitude. And when he heard I was going to be here and invited me to come and speak on the issue of stereotyping, I was very glad to do that. So I too, Peggy, have drafted my remarks and would like to share them partly just to keep within the time frame. So my title is A Stereotype Worth Believing In. Poets Speak Peace. One seldom thinks of a poet as a misanthrope. Oh, they may ring out the words of that Jeremiah, warning us that we have missed the mark, and leave us shaking in our boots, as the Texans in my stereotype might say. But more often, they offer up hymns of praise and peace, and call us to recognize the gifts of every human being. Decorating the halls of the United Nations, the Hall of Nations, headquarters in New York, are these words from the Persian poet Saadi. Human beings are members of a whole, in creation of one essence and soul. If one member is afflicted with pain, other members uneasy will remain. Parts and wholes, members and bodies, these are the risks of stereotypes that are resolved in beauty by the poet. If synecdoche and metonymy ease and enrich our mental efforts to understand a very complex world, the poets remind us that we can use the building blocks of stereotypes to celebrate the other, rather than to denigrate and demonize the other. William Stafford wrote, "They say sound is the ear and sight the eye, that time is the blood, scoring a faint blue line over the temple bone. And it is true. Blue veins are worn on temples this year. Teeth are parted and lips are smiles. And I believe there is no land as far as this year's eyes look toward, or as far as we listen in silence. The thought that there is such a land is false. I have not found that land." There is a prophetic longing in his voice. At Saadi's garden in Shiraz, one might stand at the tomb of the poet, putting one's fingers on his sarcophagus to take inspiration. Across from a farmer from Yazd, a jeweler from Mashhad, or a doctor from Tehran. Across the city of Shiraz, in the garden of Hafiz, you might stand under the pillared dome of the poet with students from the university, from Afghanistan, or a pilgrim from Karbala, Iraq, and hear Hafiz's words read by a German professor visiting with students from all across Europe. Hafiz, who says, "I have learned so much. I have learned so much from God that I can no longer call myself a Christian, a Hindu, a Muslim, a Buddhist, a Jew. The truth has shared so much of itself with me that I can no longer call myself a man, a woman, an angel, or even pure soul. Love has befriended Hafiz so completely, it has turned to ash and freed me of every concept and image my mind has ever known. These are the trappings of a great culture, which teaches us lessons of tolerance and unity in stone as we walk the plazas of Persepolis, where tribute was paid centuries of peace and prosperity, and when we visit the tombs of Darius and of Cyrus, who gave sanctuary to the Jews of Babylon, who have now stayed for millennia of extended welcome. These are not a people who should be reduced to images of warmongers and hosts of terrorists. Least in our demonizing them, we will open the bomb bays of warplanes and vaporize hundreds of thousands into gases of hatred and oblivion once again. As William Stafford, poet laureate of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, reminds us, every war has two losers. We might call them truth and love, though we actually know them as Adam and Eve, Adonis and Aphrodite, Mohandas and Vanessa, Martin and Dorothy. As William Stafford wrote in the year of my birth, 1947, in the poem, "It Was This Way." Again today I have not saved the world. My friends have been asking me to. But it took me so long to be neighbors that while I was trimming my hedge, a war began between Arabs and Jews. And off across the country, my congressman dared 200 million Russians to come over and fight. Again today, I have not saved the world, and here it is, almost night. Nor do we need to reach back a generation or 2 or 20 to see the threats of genocide and the risks of stereotypes. The personifications of young men and women, gay, lesbian, transgendered, bisexual, as evil threats to civilization, threaten instead an apocalypse in parts of Africa and across America. How could the hands and hearts of loving companionship be so demonized by ignorance? And how is it that the lust for combustion-driven, conspicuous consumption, fed by the utter poverty that can only be relieved by growing crops of poppies and waving plains of hashish, can lead to the killing fields of Helmand and broadcasting of body parts across the borderlands of Mexico and the United States? Addictions fed by a country that has lost its soul are so poisonous that they seem to dissolve the faces of children and women before the very eyes of gun-toting civil servants who blow them away as though they were digital packs of electrons in some video game on the screen. Tomorrow, in Murder City, as Charles Bowden calls it, Ciudad Juarez, in the global economy's new killing fields, a city of 7,000 murders, and in El Paso, Texas, where the seepage of today's drug war weeps across the border into Mexico, witnesses will gather to pay homage, to render homage to the dead. May we find our legacy at the tombs of poets rather than at the graves of soldiers, in the flowered fields of rain-awakened Sonora rather than the ovens of Auschwitz. All the great poets of our traditions, Jesus, Abraham and Moses, Buddha and Muhammad, Zarathustra, and the anonymous pens of the Gita, Jeremiah and Isaiah, David and Micah, none of them blind to the horrors of war, all, in the end, offer words of the wholeness of the human spirit and the oneness of the universe, a creation to be celebrated, not destroyed. The great Afghan, Persian, Turkish Sufi Rumi, in one of his most quoted poems, There Is a Field Beyond, says, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in the grass, the world is too full to talk about. More recently, the writing of Jean Knudsen Hoffman, who died last year, has reminded us that the enemy is an other whose story we do not know. Her path to compassionate listening is the path of peace. It is through that dialogue that stereotypes dissolve into empathy, into a shared humanity that would inoculate us against the threats of violence and genocide. Let me offer Hafiz, who often addressed himself in his poems, in a closing homage to the poet. The great religions are the ships. Poets are the lifeboats. Every sane person I know has jumped overboard. That is good for business, isn't it, Hafiz?
Wow.